I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch network. Donald Trump's lawyer, Tim Parlatore, sent a letter to allies, MAGA Republicans, within the House Permanent Selection Committee on Intelligence, and specifically to the MAGA Republican chair of that committee, Mike Turner, and essentially requested that they interfere with the Department of Justice's ongoing criminal investigation into Donald Trump through special counsel Jack Smith and Jack Smith's team. Basically, what Donald Trump's lawyers are asking the House Permanent Selection Committee on Intelligence to do is exactly what Jim Jordan of the House Judiciary Committee, controlled by Jim Jordan and other MAGA Republicans, are doing with respect to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, trying to interfere with the criminal case there. And you'll see as I go through this letter, Donald Trump's lawyers actually give these MAGA Republicans marching orders and says, what we want you to do is order the Department of Justice to stand down in their criminal investigation into Donald Trump, and specifically tell special counsel Jack Smith to back away from Donald Trump. And this letter I'm about to read you is basically a series of talking points that Donald Trump is giving to his MAGA Republican cult followers who hold leadership positions in the House of Representatives. But also buried in this letter is something very, very interesting, and it's a criminal admission by Donald Trump's lawyer, although they may not see it that way. It clearly is if you break down what it is they're saying. And they talk about in the letter how Donald Trump back in January of 2022 turned over these 15 boxes to the National Archives. And within these 15 boxes, there included newspaper clippings and other documents, but there was also very highly classified information in these boxes. And when the National Archives received these records back in January of 2022, after close to a year of asking for these boxes back nicely and saying, hey, can we please get all of the records that you stole and brought to Mar-a-Lago? Can you please just return them to us? What the National Archives discovered in these boxes was top secret information, sensitive compartmented information, and other classified information. And we're starting to learn now what those records were, at least what was in that 15 box drop that Donald Trump gave back in January of 2022. Recall, there was also about 30 plus classified records turned over in June of 2022. And then after repeatedly being lied to, the Department of Justice and FBI had to execute a search warrant on August 8th. They got a probable cause determination made by a magistrate judge. They executed a search warrant, found thousands of other documents still being concealed at Mar-a-Lago on August 8th of 2022, including over 100 additional classified documents and top secret records and other sensitive compartmented information. And so if you go through this letter, here is what Donald Trump's lawyers say is actually in those 15 boxes. And the way they're able to kind of figure out what's in it is they were given access to the boxes, but just not the classified information. So they were given access by the National Archives into those 15 boxes that were returned, but there were these placeholder markings within the 15 boxes. So as they were able to review, as Trump's lawyers were able to review what was turned over by Donald Trump in January of 2022, and they looked at these placeholders that were put there in place of the classified records, which the National Archives took and gave to the Department of Justice, they were able to figure out what those documents are. And this is what they say. This is from the letter, page 3, and I'll go through the full letter with you, but this is the key point I want to bring your attention to. It says, the vast majority, again, this is from Donald Trump's lawyers, the vast majority of the placeholder inserts refer to briefings for phone calls with foreign leaders that were located near the schedule for those calls. This organization of materials, i.e. schedule of calls for the day, insert page for briefing sheet to prepare for the call, newspapers from the same day, indicates that the White House staff simply swept all documents from the president's desk and other areas into boxes where they have resided ever since. But you go back to that paragraph, and what they're saying is that these placeholder inserts refer to briefings for phone calls with foreign leaders. So that's what was in those first, at least some of the material, some of this classified information was briefings with phone calls with foreign leaders that Donald Trump took with him to Mar-a-Lago. And just think about, why would he be taking information about phone calls that he had with foreign leaders? Obviously classified information, obviously very sensitive information, those phone calls with these foreign leaders, and obviously something that he could try to misuse in a transactional sense when he is a private citizen. And perhaps that's what he has been engaged in. So I'm not really sure the point that they're trying to make. I'll go through this letter with you briefly so you can try to judge for yourself what it is that Donald Trump's lawyers are trying to say. But, they classify all of that information, the classified information, they call it spillage. And they say it's like inadvertent spillage that had the National Archives just been more helpful to Donald Trump, had they went to him and said, "Sir, how could we help you?" then none of this, what they call spillage, would ever have happened. And it was just a mistake. And it's actually the National Archives' fault for not helping Donald Trump and not working with him to take back the documents, which belies the whole timeline here, right? I mean, after January of 2021, when Donald Trump left the White House, the National Archives said, "Hey, can you turn back over those records? We're happy to help you." That's the timeline. And Donald Trump said, "No, I do not have any documents. There's nothing to help out. Go away." The National Archives repeatedly said, "Hey, we're happy to help you. Like, what can we do? We believe you have records that you stole. Can we please get involved?" And Trump and his lawyers repeatedly said no throughout all of 2021. And finally, the National Archives like, "Well, then we're going to have to make a criminal referral if you're not allowing us to work with you and help you." That's when Donald Trump turned over these boxes in January of 2022. And then thereafter, the National Archives had to make the referral to the Department of Justice because they found all this sensitive compartmented information and classified records. And then the Department of Justice said, "Hey, can you please turn over everything else? Look, we're not trying to issue a formal subpoena here. Just please turn over the records." And Donald Trump said, "There are no records. There's nothing else that exists." Like, that was a lie. That's obstruction of justice. So if you were trying to be cooperative, and you'll see in this letter, that's how Donald Trump tries to paint it. I wanted to be helpful, but ultimately the National Archives weren't helpful. And then they brought in the sledgehammer. He calls it like a sledgehammer of the Department of Justice. And then the Department of Justice was all aggressive with me and they weren't being cooperative. No, they were being cooperative. They finally had to issue a subpoena in May of 2022 after you refused to cooperate. Then on June of 2022, you submitted a declaration under penalty of perjury from your lawyers, Evan Corcoran and Christina Bobb, lying and saying that in the small folder you returned over to them on January 3rd, 2022, that was it, that you had no other classified information, which again was a lie. So all of this is lies for the purpose of getting MAGA Republicans in Congress to try to interfere with the criminal investigation by Special Counsel Jack Smith. So look, here's the letter via email sent April 26, 2023 from Trump's lawyer, Tim Parlatore, Law Group. "Dear Chairman Turner, Mike Turner, the MAGA Republican who chairs the House Permanent Selection Committee on Intelligence." And it goes, "We represent Donald Trump. We're writing to provide information regarding the probe by the Department of Justice." And then it goes into some of the key points that it's trying to make here. And so if you go into some of the points that it's trying to make, just so you see what I said is actually in the letter, you go to page 2. It says, "To be clear, had NARA, the National Archives, offered President Trump the same assistance it had provided to all previous presidents, he would have accepted the offer, and there would have been no reason to transfer the documents to Mar-a-Lago." So just think about what Donald Trump is blaming the National Archives for. Like, you weren't as helpful to me as you were with all of the past presidents. Maybe it's just that all of the other past presidents actually had a work ethic and they reached out to the National Archives and went through the procedures under the Presidential Records Act. The National Archives, they're not babysitters, right? They're a government agency. Adults who are in political office have obligations. You're supposed to reach out and you're supposed to go through a process. But just this victim mentality of Donald Trump, well, they didn't help me enough and they helped all the other presidents more. I mean, it's just so freaking pathetic. So that's where he goes first. Then on page 3, they go, NARA, the National Archives' variance from its standard procedures, ignited a dispute with President Trump when it, quote, discovered that boxes were being transferred to Florida. In January 2022, in an attempt to cooperate with NARA, President Trump asked his staff to retrieve 15 boxes that had been moved to Mar-a-Lago. So just watch how disingenuous it is right there, right? They totally skip over what happened for a full year. So what happened between January 2021 and January of 2022? The National Archives was asking for this stuff back, and Donald Trump was lying and not turning it back, refusing to cooperate. But they just gloss over that part of the timeline. And then they say it's the National Archives' variance from its standard procedures. What they're saying is the National Archives should have helped Donald Trump just as it helped these past presidents. But because of that variance, Donald Trump was forced to steal the documents and bring them to Mar-a-Lago because National Archives weren't helpful enough to Donald Trump, right? That's how pathetic that is. You go into page 3, and what they say is that basically the National Archives, then, they were wrong to referring this to the Department of Justice. What they should have done is referred it to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, ODNI, or to this committee, to you, Mr. Turner, and not the DOJ. And then they say the improper involvement of the DOJ in what should have been an administrative investigation of the mishandling or spillage, there's the word, spillage, of documents with classified markings, set this matter on the wrong course. And in the current political environment, Attorney General Merrick Garland and the DOJ predictably chose to pursue this as a criminal investigation. So here, the lie that Donald Trump's lawyers are making, and they want the MAGA Republicans to start parroting this lie over and over again, is look, Trump would have cooperated. This isn't obstruction of justice with the Department of Justice. The reason Trump lied over and over again to the Department of Justice, it's not Donald Trump's fault. It's Merrick Garland's fault because of how the current political environment is, and it's so politicized. Look, had this just been referred to ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, or this committee, Donald Trump wouldn't have obstructed justice, but they turned it over to Merrick Garland improperly. Total bogus argument, but that's essentially what they are saying right here. And then they go, all indications are that the presence of marked documents at Mar-a-Lago was the result of haphazard records keeping and packing by the White House staff and the GSA. So what does Donald Trump do? He throws his own staff under the bus and says, look, the fact that this was even brought to Mar-a-Lago, okay, first, it's the National Archives' fault. Just think about these arguments, right? First, it's the National Archives' fault. They did it. Second, it's the Department of Justice's fault, right? It's way too political. Of course, Donald Trump's going to obstruct justice if this is being handled by Merrick Garland. Okay. If you don't buy that one, well, it's the fault of Donald Trump's staff for their haphazard record keeping. Donald Trump saying, let me blame my staff. And finally, I'll just blame the General Services Administration. I'll just blame the GSA. It's their fault as well. It's everybody's fault other than Donald Trump's fault. And then here's the conclusion. The solution to these issues is not a misguided, politically infected, and severely botched criminal investigation, but rather a legislative solution. DOJ should be ordered to stand down, and the intelligence community should instead conduct an appropriate investigation and provide a full report to this committee. So they're now giving, this is Trump's lawyers giving the committee their marching orders and saying what you need to do. Interfere with the DOJ. Your committee needs to take over this process and parrot our talking points. But meanwhile, as I mentioned before, in that letter, it does admit what some of these documents are, that these documents refer to briefings from phone calls with foreign leaders, which again, buried in this, because Donald Trump's lawyers are not the brightest people, is a very damaging criminal admission as well. But here you have Donald Trump running going to the MAGA Republicans in Congress, saying, please do my bidding, just as you're doing it in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office criminal case. Total lawlessness from the Republican Party, and what a pathetic letter. I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Hit subscribe. We're on our way to 1.5 million subscribers. Help us get there, 1.5 million subscribers by this summer. Also, check us out at patreon.com/MeidasTouch. patreon.com/MeidasTouch. Become a member of our Patreon site. And in addition, you can check us out wherever you get your audio podcast. Search the MeidasTouch podcast. It's free to subscribe. All right, hit subscribe on YouTube. It is free. Have a great day.
At MeidasTouch, we are unapologetically pro-democracy, and we demand justice and accountability. That's why we're spreading our message to Convict 45. That's right, gear up right now with your Convict 45 tees and pins at store.MeidasTouch.com. That's store.MeidasTouch.com.